Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about religion and my history with it, and what I view as the most damaging aspect of religion. So, to begin with, I'll just tell you guys a little bit about my history with religion. I grew up as a Catholic, and I got very into it during my high school years, and I was a very, very religious person. I would look up a lot of stuff about Aquinas, and I'd get into the very philosophical areas of Catholicism and why Catholicism was right and how it applied to life. And I ultimately ended up joining this group called GS, or Gioventù Studentesca, which is student youth. It was a Catholic movement started by some priest named Luigi Giussani. But yeah, whatever, that's all irrelevant at this point because I kind of left that movement, obviously, when I became an objectivist, or pulled me away from, I wouldn't really say I'm an objectivist yet, because I don't have the full, I guess I am, but I don't have the greatest grasp of the concepts yet to where I can argue and apply them perfectly but whatever, I digress. For me, religion was a big part of my life back in early high school, and ultimately, when I think back on it, it had very, very damaging effects on my psychology and my view of life, and ultimately, it was a big, big cause of the symptoms of depression I had. I wouldn't say necessarily I had depression, but I think I had a lot of symptoms of it. The main issue that I had when I was religious was a low view of man and human nature. Ultimately, that was what I viewed as, that was the biggest problem that had a direct impact on me. Obviously, there's other things like primacy of consciousness and epistemology, all those problems with religion, but a big part of me had was already headed in a decent direction with those, since I more subscribed to the Thomistic school of Catholicism rather than Augustine, who I didn't really like even back then. But I was definitely more leaning on the side of a rational epistemology, and even though obviously I did believe in God, so there's obviously the flaws that come with that. But the biggest issue with my psychology at that time was the low view of man that religion has, and that led to a lot of ethical or problems with my ethics and problems with my psychology, all that sort of stuff. So basically, the essence of the religious position is summed up by something that I used to say quite a bit. I used to write this quite a bit in my journals back in the day. I would say, man is a being of infinite desire and an infinite inability to achieve that desire. So it's a view of man as weak, fundamentally, in need of other people, or others, in need of some external thing to come in and satisfy it. And ultimately, what man would need was this great capital O other, which was God. That was my formulation for God. And it led to a very warped version of love, where it was sacrifice. Let the other person fulfill you. Give up your own happiness for other people, because ultimately your happiness is only going to come from other people, which was a very, very, very corrupt way of looking at the world. And it ultimately led me to thinking extremely second-handedly, caring constantly what other people thought all the time, and not being a very happy person. So ultimately, I corrected that when I read The Fountainhead. I saw this character in Roark, just this uncompromising principled, self-sufficient person, contrasted with Peter Keating, who I saw a lot of in myself at the time. And I recognized that was a very, very bad path to head down. It was not going to lead me to happiness, which even back then, that was my ultimate goal. I really just wanted to be happy. That was my central need, was to be happy. But I thought, as a human being, I'm weak, that I need other people to fulfill me. And that is ultimately the religious view. That's original sin. That's the Garden of Eden. That's Adam. That's all that stuff. And ultimately we need to forget. That's the prodigal son. We need God to come in and forgive us. That's a very, very pronounced theme in religion, and it's very damaging. But ultimately, as human beings, what Rand taught me was we are all rational beings. We can set our own principles. We can think for ourselves. We can decide what things are going to make us happy and go out and achieve those things. We can strive for greatness. We can become heroic beings. And that realization absolutely changed my life. I became a much more confident person. I became much more happy as well. I began to be a lot more happy in my life as a result of seeing man as a heroic being, which was ultimately Rand's goal in her books. And that really pulled me away from my formerly religious way of thinking, and ultimately led me to want to correct my epistemology, to get rid of God, because a lot of my epistemology and metaphysics was simply the rationalizations of Aquinas, or his 5 proofs, which it's just rationalism. Rationalism being just creating floating abstractions based off premises that are just not based in reality. So yeah, I just wanted God to be true, because I thought, happiness is impossible without the other, which is what I viewed God as at the time. And ultimately, honest religious people end up acknowledging this. In my conversations with religious people here on campus and just throughout my life, all religious people tend to acknowledge, or they ultimately reduce down to that claim that man is weak and he needs God to fulfill him, which is a very, very terrible view of man. And that's ultimately what our argument becomes over. Is man a rational being? Can man achieve on his own? And ultimately, I think the answer is yes. I believe that once we correct our subconsciouses, once we create rational goals, have rational principles, we can pursue and we can achieve happiness. And ultimately, now there are certain positive aspects I do see with religion as well, and I guess I'll go into that a little bit here. Religious people do seem happy. They do seem like they have a confident purpose in their life, like that they have a reason to live, that they have a meaning in their life. And ultimately, I came to this realization earlier when I was talking to a religious person. He was kind of explaining, like, oh yeah, when all else fails, we know God still loves us. We have this unconditional love from God, which is actually a very terrible way of viewing love as well as unconditional, as it's just a very selfless form of love, and it leads you to sacrifice your own personal happiness for nothing. It leads you to place some other standard besides happiness. But that's for a different video. I'll talk about unconditional love sometime later. Yeah, but he viewed God as this being that will fulfill him when he's feeling weak, or when even if he fails, he'll still have this basic confidence that God loves him. And then ultimately what I realized was this comes from a lack of self-esteem. This comes from a low view of self, that you need some other being to fulfill this role that self-esteem plays. Because self-esteem is ultimately this idea that I believe in myself. I like love myself and will always have that. That's the role that self-esteem plays in this situation. Like, it's that foundation that you can fall back on when stuff is failing. You just say, no, I'm great, I can achieve this, I can do this. And it's just a love of self. You obviously have to correct things, and self-esteem does involve saying, okay, these are the things that I'm not good at, these are the things I need to improve to be happy. But self-esteem plays that role of that foundation where you feel that you deserve to live. And religious people don't have that, so they fall back on God for that. And a lot of the nihilistic, non-religious people, they don't have that self-esteem either. So when they fall back, they fall into pure nihilism, this idea that life is meaningless and we have no reason to be here, and we don't deserve life, and that all this sort of nihilistic bullshit. But ultimately what objectivism does is replaces this fleeting God-based self-esteem, which isn't self-esteem, but it doesn't work as well because God's not real. God is some external being, and also God's some external being, and it's not something that's constantly with you, yourself. And yeah, the self-esteem is absolutely necessary. It's the most foundational way to get this foundation, I guess. Yeah. So yeah, self-esteem is absolutely key to breaking away from religion. It's probably why religious people view it as the worst sin. I forget their exact terminology now, but they just view it as the worst sin. And also Aristotle viewed pride as as the crown of all virtues, which is absolutely beautiful because it really is, because it leads you to feeling like you deserve to live, which religious people use God to say they deserve to live, but it's an external source for their life, so it's not as substantial. It doesn't mean as much. But when you have real pride in your life, you will always have a certainty that you deserve to live, that your happiness is meaningful. And ultimately, yeah, I think that's all I have to say for today. Thank you guys for watching, and see you in the next video. Peace.